readers and writers, conversations between readers and writers. This panel is writing careers, the overarching question, what does it mean to have a successful writing career today? We have this incredible panel. We're very fortunate to have these people all gathered together. First we have Helene Stapinski. She began her writing career at her hometown newspaper, remember those? The Jersey Journal. She is the author of 3 memoirs, Five Finger Discount, A Crooked Family History, Baby Plays Around, A Love Affair with Music, and Murder in Matera. Her latest book, The American Way, follows the life of a man who escaped Nazi Berlin with the help of Superman's publisher. Her essays have appeared in several anthologies, most recently, Drinking Diaries, Women Serve Their Stories Straight Up. Helene has also written extensively for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Travel and Leisure, Food and Wine, Salon, Real Simple, New York Magazine, and dozens of other newspapers, magazines, and blogs. She's been featured on NPR's All Things Considered, The Today Show, and as a performer with The Moth Main Stage. She received her BA in journalism from New York University in 1987 and her MFA from Columbia in 1995. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and her dog.
The kids are gone.
And the kids are gone. And she's ex-husband.
Oh, I'm sorry, I miss you kids.
Ann Howard has been a practicing attorney for 20 years, including 2 years as a judicial decision writer for the federal government. Howard holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, where she graduated with distinction, and a law degree from the University of Cincinnati College of Law, where she graduated with Dean's Honors. In addition to writing Escape from Mariupol, a survivor's true story with Doriana Marek, Howard has also written His Garden, Conversations with a Serial Killer. She wrote The Ghost in Her, Book 1 in the Unbuilded series, under the pen name Annika Savoy. Anne is the recipient of numerous literary awards, including the Independent Press Award, the New York City Big Book Award, the Reader's Favorite Award, and the International Book Award. She is featured in various true crime shows, including 21st Century Serial Killers, Season 1, Episode 3 on Amazon Prime. She has also done interviews with NPR and dozens of podcasts. Chris Belden is the author of novels and story collections, including Schreiber, which was adapted into the film A Little White Lie, starring Michael Shannon and Kate Hudson. He attended the University of Michigan, where he received a BA in Film and Video Studies. After college, he worked lousy day jobs for several years while playing drums in the band The Slang. He later moved to New York City, where he worked in the publishing industry and started writing fiction in earnest. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including American Fiction, SM Review, and Skid Row Penthouse. He is co-author of the feature film Amnesia and has written extensively for the stage. As a singer-songwriter, he's also released 2 albums of original music. He's taught writing at Fairfield University, as well as at such non-traditional venues as senior centers, soup kitchens, and a maximum security prison. This month, he released Closer to Freedom, an anthology of writing by prisoners at Garner Correctional Institution in Newtown, where he led a writing workshop for 10 years. Joe Godfrey is a New York and Connecticut-based playwright whose play Massage Therapy was produced last month at Open Space Arts in Chicago. His play Romance Language was seen at Ars Nova in New York City, and after an initial production at Seven Angels in Woodbury. Other produced and published plays include A Queer Carol, Understanding Lear, Widows, and Pigtail. His many short plays have been seen in numerous festivals here and abroad. Joe has written for the Westchester County Monthly, Washingtonian, New York Times, Harper's, The Progressive, and Litchfield County Times. He graduated cum laude from Lehigh University and taught English at the Petty School in New Jersey. Member of the Dramatists Guild's AEA and SAG-AFTRA, Joe is also an actor, narrator, and voiceover artist. Wow, we got some, right?
Lots of jobs.
Yeah.
I was a bartender too.
All right. We have a really wonderful panel because everybody's bringing something very unique to the conversation. And I wanted to start with a selection from Helene's Letter to My Younger Self, number 4, Hungry Like a Wolf, that she wrote in March of this year. And Helene wrote about a time she expressed her intention to become a writer. Your high school guidance counselor, a nun, has just told you a few weeks earlier that you should be an engineer because you were good at science. But your grades are good in all your classes. You are a nerd, albeit a nerd with cool friends who snort cocaine. What you most want to become is a writer. You tell Sister Peggy this and she laughs at you. So starting with Helene, what's your advice to writers of any age who find themselves up against naysayers?
Don't go to Catholic school. I don't know, I mean, advice, I don't know. I think there's something inside you that's just telling you to, what you are and who you are. Because I came from a working class background and I had never known a writer. I didn't know how to do that. That wasn't, my father worked in a frozen fruit warehouse, my mother was a clerk at the DMV, so I think if you have the talent, it's just sort of gonna hopefully lead you in a good direction, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, it was just a series of lucky stops along the way, having people who did the antithesis of Sister Peggy, which I think you might get to later. Having people encourage you, but you just kind of, it's a matter of luck and drive, I think,
Right, and hard work. I mean, your resume is the result of
you have to take the little job, and it builds up from there. I think I teach at NYU as well, and I think some of these kids think they're just going to get an internship at the Times, and that's going to be it. I'm like, you have to start at like a crappy little whatever, whether it's a newspaper these days or it's a blog or whatever, and someone there sees. From that, someone sees you, and then you go to something bigger, and from that, you go to something bigger. It's sort of like that's how it works. And from the stories I did from my local weekly, which was practically a shopper, I went to the daily paper, and from the daily paper, I started freelancing for bigger things, magazines, newspapers, and from there I went to Columbia, and then I ended up writing my first book, and so it takes a while, and I think patience is maybe part of it, but also that stick-to-itiveness, or whatever you want to call it, because people just drop out too. I mean, if you're the last man standing, you're gonna make it. So, you're the last one. Stick it around. You just
Got it. Thank you. And how about you? Did you have an Sister Peggy? Naysayers?
Actually, I did have a few Sister Peggies in my past. When I was in public school, a very good school in Woodbury, Massachusetts, in my freshman year of school, I was like many girls caught up in boys and sports and whatnot, and I wasn't trying. And I had an English teacher who was really into the rules of grammar, and I didn't do well in the course. And it's because I've just never been a rule girl. I kind of write just organically, based on what I read, it influences me. So she demoted me to out of the AP class the next year.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and I made up for it. Then I worked really hard, and I had teachers tell me, "You have a gift. You are a writer," which struck me as so strange that something I thought that I was bad at, I was actually good at, and it was all based on what kind of teacher you have. And likewise, I had many subsequent teachers in high school who encouraged me. And my first year at McGill, I had a professor who was a Shakespearean scholar. And she touted herself as the #1 Shakespeare expert in the world. And I think what I'm trying to say is, she told me I cannot write. She wrote it all over my essay. Like my first semester of college, you cannot write. And a couple Amazon bestsellers later, I guess I can write, but it speaks to more about where they're at than where you're at. So much is based on preference with writing, with any of the arts, but also I think just when I look back on it, I tend to butt heads with academics, even though technically if you look at my resume, you could say, well, she's an academic. But I find that I just love the art of storytelling, and it's an art, it's not work. Yes, it does involve a lot of work, but it's something spiritual, it's something magical, and I think what's most important is you never lose sight of the magic of it, and the beauty of it, and how it makes you feel when you do it, how it makes you feel when other people read it and are affected by it, and you can talk about it. So I so agree with what you said, Helen. It's just focus on the love of it, that you have this gift. Do it, love it, believe in yourself. And there will always be naysayers, no matter what occupation you do. So if you love to do it, then for God's sake, just do it. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I kind of wish I had a sister Peggy. I mean, there were plenty of sisters. I went to Catholic school. But, there was none that said, don't do that, you know. If they had, I probably would have done it quicker. Just because it was really like two were the opposite of what sisters Peggy's. I didn't know you could, I mean, I knew, I read, my whole family read, you know. We were a big book family, so I knew there were authors out there in the world, but I never met one. Growing up, I had no idea how one went about it. There was no opportunity to learn that when I was a kid. I didn't grow up in the middle of the wilderness. I grew up in a decent-sized town in Northeast Ohio, you know, and but there was no writers, as far as I could tell, anywhere where I lived. And it wasn't until much later. Once I got into college and I started writing, and I thought, well, this is fun, you know. But then I got sidelined by music and film and those things. But it's all connected, you know. It's the thing. It's like, be creative, you know. Do it all. I was talking with my daughter, who was a senior in high school, about the senior the yearbook, you know. And I said, do they have like the most likely to whatever in this yearbook? And she's like, I don't know, maybe they do. And I said I was the most creative. That's the one I got, because I was making movies, I was in a band, I was, you know, I would write stories, but I had no desire to be any of those things necessarily at that point. I just kind of had to grow into it and find my way. Unfortunately, no young people have ever come to me and said, you know, should I be a writer? How does one be a writer? And I kind of worry about that. Like, where are they? You know, are they just playing video games and they're not going to be writers?
There's a few at NYU.
Yeah, sure, at NYU there are, yeah.
There are probably too many. Get them away.
But, you know, like, where are they? Well, it frightens me a little bit. And, you know, my town, I lived in Ridgefield. You know, it's a bookish town, you know. There's a great little bookstore there, the library is very vibrant and everything, and people know it. You know, it's a small town. It's easy to get known, and so far nobody's approached me. I feel bummed out.
As far as naysayers, we've all had our share of naysayers. I had a guidance counselor in high school who said, you should be a doctor. That's what you should be. I thought, I never thought of that. I don't think I want to be a doctor. Someone else said, you should go into advertising. I did do some advertising writing at some point, but and then you know, even when I was starting to get some plays produced, looking for an agent, and one said to me, you know, what do you want? And I said, well, to have a play in New York, to produce a play in New York eventually, to speak to somebody. And she said, well, now take the needle out of your vein and come back to reality. Well, so the naysayers are all out there, but there are encouraging people too, and I did eventually get a play in New York. 1979, as a matter of fact, as a very young man. It was not on Broadway, it was off Broadway, off technically, almost in the river. But it was, you know, an accomplishment. Now we're getting to, are you a writer, or what makes you think you are? Well, you just write. I started at an early age, and yeah, some encouragement with family. They were readers, and I always liked written word, but I always liked the theatrical part of it too. So so-called middle school and then in high school, I also acted. But I like to write the plays as well as being in them. I guess I was 15 in high school when I wrote my first real play, which was for the Latin Club. Does anybody still study Latin? Anybody still study Latin? Does anybody in high school? But play was in English. And
Good.
it was about the Emperor Nero after he dies, crossing the river Styx into the underworld. And it was called Fiddlesticks. Big disappointment, it never got to Broadway. So, you know, I encourage, I kept going that way, and in college and after, and this is a different subject we'll probably get to. Then really the work starts, particularly playwriting. You have to, it's a fishing expedition. More on that later if you ask.
Okay. It's just really interesting to hear, thinking about the randomness of the feedback. You know, you're vulnerable when you're young. And somebody has influence on you and they say, don't do this. The power they have to possibly shut you down. And it's just a small thing. I started life in Bethel, Connecticut. My family moved to Danbury, Connecticut, a total of 4 miles away. I went from being in remedial reading as a first grader to an accelerated reader in second grade. So that just kind of struck me. I'll tell you all about Miss Roundtree sometime. She was a boom, and she scared me. And the effect that a negative influence can have on you. All we did was move 4 miles. It was all fluoridated public water. It's no big difference, you know. So, but back to you guys. Later in the same essay, Helene describes a professor at NYU who you say is the antithesis of Sister Peggy. Is it Mousehart?
Mousehart.
Yeah, was calling you into the office at the end of freshman year and telling you, and you thought you did something wrong. There go those authority figures driving us crazy, right? But she explains to you that you are a writer, that you need to be a writer. She is the antithesis of Sister Peggy. Do you know how to go about being a writer, she asks. How to become a writer. So I'm just wondering, how do you discover, yes, this is the thing. I'm not just writing a quick thing because it's an occasion that I want to write about, but that this is truly a calling. This is where your soul is taking your life.
I mean, I had started writing as a very small kid. I mean, I was 5 years old writing stories. My mom, like I said, worked at the DMV and they had typewriters there. So she would take me to work with her sometimes, and I would write stories on the typewriters at the DMV. So I still have them. I mean, it's stories and poems. And so it was there, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I didn't have to find it. It's coming in inside and out.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of putting it all together and saying, not everybody's doing this. You know what I mean? I think like in 8th grade, there was like, we had to write a school play, and I wrote it, you know, and it was a big hit. And it was like, you know, like a bunch of skits, whatever. And I was like, really loved that applause, you know. And so it was just like stage by stage, like I said, you go. And then in high school, I became the high school, the editor of the high school paper. You know, so it's these little steps you take, you know, and then you meet Sue Mousehart, who says, you need to do this for a living. And, you know, whoever thought of that? Can you write for a living? I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure it's possible, but you know, we're working on it. But yeah, so you just need that one big spark, you know, to push you in that direction, I think. And there were a series of those people as well. Into graduate school, I had a mentor in graduate school, you know, and so they kind of push you in that direction.
So I'm just curious, Helene, who was your audience for your DMV produced text? Was it the DMV staff or?
Yeah, my mother and all her friends, and then the boss of the DMV, the guy who ran the DMV. He was like very excited. I think he gave me money because he was. That's a great story. Here's $5. That was my first payday, you know. But no, it was a very limited audience, obviously. But yeah, it was in there. It's bubbling out, and then you can't stop it. It's sort of like.
Just the validating experience of an appreciative audience
Right.
has to do for payment for sometimes, right? How about you, Anne?
Yeah, I think it was through journal writing and keeping diaries as a child. I came from a family, 5 siblings. I was the youngest, Irish Catholic family with, you know, very strong ideas about what the role of each person in the family was. And being a girl and being the youngest, you know, I felt very isolated. And so I started at a very young age, 6 or 7, to keep diaries and journals. And what happened was this kind of discovery for me that I felt more comfortable when I was writing than when I was speaking and behaving in everyday life. Like I felt this immediate intimacy with the paper, with the word, with my ideas, with seeing the words. And I felt like my real voice could come out because it was a family environment where, you know, you kind of weren't allowed to speak, you weren't allowed to express your truth. So that I had this private little secret place that I could do all that was just instrumental in deciding that I wanted to become a writer. And then I remember the first book I read without pictures, which was just words, was about Helen Keller's teacher, Annie Sullivan. And it was a biography of Annie Sullivan. And I was so affected by that book and by the imagery, and there was a moment, I was about 9 years old, where I looked at the words on the page and I thought, I understood how amazing that this person I've never met, never will meet, wrote these words, and they're going into my brain and they're affecting me in such a deep way. And what a gift, what a beautiful thing to be able to do that, to write these things down and give it to people and communicate in that intimate way. And that's when I decided for sure I wanted to be a writer or a lawyer. That was it. and that's another thing that, you know, you look around at all the lawyers, you know, and, you know, something that's not often said about the legal profession is how much writing is involved. And that really perfected, I talked earlier about my grammar skills, but that's when I really did learn how to write well. And finally, I think in college, my first writing award, I got $500 for. I received for a creative short story in my first year of college. And that was the first time when I was paid for my writing. And there's something about actually receiving money where you think, oh, now that's validating, you know, maybe I do have something special.
Yeah.
That's great. Just as I never had a nun or anybody else tell me not to write. Nobody ever said you should write. You know, you should. And you are writing.
Yeah.
I kind of had to figure it out on my own, and just sitting here listening to stories, I'm remembering this moment, and it was in college. I don't know what year it was. And it was a creative writing class, workshop. And the teacher was this guy, his name was Edmund Creeth.
That's a good name.
He looked like an Edmund Creeth. He was like 6'3", very gaunt. And the story was that he'd been diagnosed with brain cancer and had 6 months to live, but that had been like 5 years ago. And so it was like some kind of weird miracle that this guy was still walking around. He had a briefcase and there was a bottle of booze in the briefcase. You know, it's a classic thing. He had this workshop, but I learned a lot in his workshop. He was a very sweet guy, and everybody had written a story, and everybody turned in their story. And he said, "We're going to do an experiment today. I'm going to read the first bit of all these stories, and if you don't like it for any reason, raise your hand, and as soon as there's 3 hands, I'm going to go to the next story."
Ouch.
And he just, you know, he started reading stories, and the hands would go up, and then he'd go to the next story, and the hands would go up. And what he'd tell us, he had one of his own stories, and the hands went up. He had the beginning of the spy who came in from the cold, John Le Carre. Hands went up. My story, no hands went up.
Wow.
And it's like, that was kind of the boom moment. Even though I didn't immediately seriously start writing from that, but it was always in there. It's like, oh, okay, nobody's hands went up. And then he read the whole story. We talked about it, and you know, it wasn't a great story. I still have it somewhere in my closet. But it grabbed people. So I thought, okay, there's something there. So maybe I should try this.
I guess I would go, I always liked to write, and I would write alone, and felt good writing alone. Going back to high school, that little play, people laughed. People thought these characters were real, and thought, gee, I enjoy doing this. And a lot of my writing is comedy, not all of it, so much drama with laughs. But and into high school and college, writing there, putting on original plays at Lehigh University that were received. I just enjoyed it. Some people would think it was homework, it was terrible to go and just be by yourself and write. But to me, I enjoyed it. Even if nothing great came out of it, it was therapeutic in a way. It was good. So I guess I just always enjoyed it. And then teaching English in New Jersey at the Petty School, a private school, we teach a creative writing class. And then the students were like, why do we have to write a short story or come up? And they said, why don't you teachers do it? So the whole English department wrote a short story. And they liked mine the best. But the hand went up, down, I guess. And thought, okay, it's corroboration. But I really just always liked doing it. And bit by bit, as you said, Ann, that all of a sudden you get corroboration with a royalty or two from a play. No, people want it, another theater wants to do it. So that keeps you going. But if people who think they might want to have a career in writing, just keep writing. You do it, enjoy it for yourself. The pleasure is in the writing sometimes,
That's right, yeah. We've done a couple poetry open mics here at the library, and it is always, I think, about the interaction among the people. It's heartwarming, and it provides this sort of connective tissue, that you can share something that's who you are in some way, and receive that validation. All right. Anne's most recent book is Escape from Mariupol, a memoir she translated in real time as a young woman and her dog made their way out of Mariupol, Ukraine, to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and finally here. It's an extraordinary tale that shows what it takes to leave your world behind, trust others for help, but never completely, and to keep going, sure that your life means something. So if you're looking at the stories each of you has written, I found myself wondering how you found your stories, or how your stories found you. Also, how do you know an incident or an anecdote has potential for a story, a novel, or a play? How does the creative muse nudge you?
Wanna start there, or
Oh,
start with me?
you want to start with me?
We'll come back.
Oh, okay. Basically, I write about what I'm fascinated about, and I hope that the people who want to read it share my fascination. So I think it's safe to say, if you're really into a subject matter, there's going to be a niche out there that shares your interests. So before I wrote the book about the serial killer, who's not at Gardner, he's at, where is he?
Cheshire.
Cheshire. Thank you, Chris. He's driven me down to enough visits with this man. He's in Cheshire, 360 years, maximum sentence. And at that time, when we moved to Connecticut, I was just really interested in true crime for all my life, reading all the Anne Rule books and Joe McGinnis and whatnot. And I was curious about some unsolved murders in our community, the Route 8 murders. And so I did a lot of research and started a blog called Serial Murders in Connecticut. And that got a lot of attraction with locals. And I wrote about all sorts of unsolved cases in Connecticut, just because I was very interested, and I also felt I had the legal background to give it substance to my blog. And then the opportunity came where this man, this serial killer, was named on TV as a person of interest in the New Britain case where the 7 bodies were left behind the strip mall in New Britain. So on a whim, I just wrote him in prison, and I said, I'd like to get to know you and possibly write a book with you about your situation and what you're accused of doing, and he was all in. So, that book came out, and we got a lot of feedback and media attention and whatnot. So that's a perfect example of the subject matter just really interested me. So what happened after that book came out and I did all of the different TV shows and podcasts was that it exhausted my fascination of the subject. And I think it's important, not to feel like you have to stay in one genre because that's what got you, popular in the first place. So I just decided to stop writing true crime. I couldn't handle the darkness and the evil, and having gotten to know a serial killer for 3 years, I just didn't want any more to do with it. And then the Escape from Mariupol book, just, again, it was kind of serendipity that this little sister of one of my friends was trapped in Mariupol at the start of the Russian invasion. She spent 5 weeks underground in a basement shelter alongside over 200 civilians under relentless aerial bombing and gunfighting in the streets. There was no heat in that shelter, no water, no food, and you know, they literally slept beside corpses because the people from the neighboring buildings would come in and having lethal injuries, and they would try to treat them, but many of the people died. So the basement was just a horrible, filthy place. And so when this girl did arrive at a refugee hostel in the Czech Republic, I got in touch with her to just see how she was doing. And when she told me what she'd been through and all the death that she'd seen and what it was like to travel through Russian-occupied territory with her dog at great risk to her life, I thought, this has to be written about. I felt a sort of journalistic responsibility, because what we know about Mariupol is only through drone imagery. I did recently see the 20 Days in Mariupol documentary that has won several awards, and so there were AP filmmakers for 20 days inside of Mariupol at the start of the invasion. But aside from that, we really don't know any of the stories that have come out of Mariupol, except from the refugees who survived and escaped. And also, she had to use a pseudonym because her parents are still in Russian-occupied territory. So writing this book was a risk to her safety and her parents' safety as well. So I think, again, I was just very fascinated by the war in Ukraine and what was happening. And so it was with that passion for that subject matter, and then knowing someone who personally was involved in it, again, it was just kind of serendipity. It just fell into my lap, and so I think that's what a good story, you know, a good story. Well, it's like the judge said about pornography. I know
when you see it.
I know when I see it.
Right.
I can't explain, you know, I can't say exactly what a good story is, but I had an immigration attorney tell me recently about a woman she'd love for me to write about who went through the Rwanda crisis. And the thing why, the reason I didn't really see a future in that project was because that story is very dated. So it's also oftentimes, it's very important to get the story while it's fresh before other writers totally exhaust the subject as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, me? Well, playwriting is a little different, but plays are about drama, big surprise. But what is drama? Well, there's some person or something where there's a roadblock thrown into it. You put it this way, a character wants something, and then there's conflict because it's not going to happen or roadblocks are pushed up. So what prompts me to write about something, it may be serendipitous, but generally it comes from an incident or a theme that I know is going to be dramatic and have conflict in it. Massage Therapy, the play just closed this month in Chicago, was about an issue that I felt strongly about. And the issue was with the end of life. Can you, someone who wants to end her own life, having gone through everything, very terminal illness, and just wants to be corroborated and helped in that end. So the conflict, of course, is no, she's not going to get help from the other people. And so it's an event like that. Another play called In Good Faith, which was stimulated by an event at St. Bartholomew's Church in New York. Big, beautiful church, old WASP clientele, congregation. Beautiful building, Stanford White building and everything, but really the building needs a lot of work, congregation's dwindling. they hire a director from the South to turn things around. Well, that was the real incident, and boy, was there conflict there. So I thought this could be a play with different, a different church, different people, but based on that. So it's usually from something I've read about or heard about and feel passionate about for drama.
For me, it's like a splinter, there's a splinter that has to come out. And I'm just thinking this retrospective because at the time, most of the time I'm not thinking, where does this story come from, It just kind of hits me and I say, well, I must write about this, right? Maybe like that. Often it's stuff in my own life or something close to me that bugs me, that I need to explore. Just as an example, Shriver is based on the experience I had. I was invited by weirdly serendipitous, weird chance to go to this writers' conference in North Dakota, and to be like a featured writer at this thing. And I had published hardly anything. I didn't have a book out. I had some stories. I had some music out, which was kind of what they were interested in. They wanted that angle. But there I was, and I was with huge award-winning writers on panels like this. Charles Johnson, National Book Award winner, Carolyn Forche, and me. And I'm just sitting there, like a deer with, in the headlights, like, what the hell am I doing here? Any minute now, they're gonna figure it out and send me home. They're just gonna get me right out of here. Exactly. You do not belong here. And I was treated so kindly. They flew me out there. They put me up in a hotel. I had a handler.
Wow.
The kid drove me around. I went to parties. People were talking to me like I was a real writer. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? And I came home and I was just rattling around my head. I was like, what was that? And I had to write this story about a guy who accidentally gets invited to a writer's conference, and the whole time he's like, they're gonna find out I'm not the real Shriver.
Yeah.
It's not me, and it's gonna go wrong, and I just had to explore it that way. And it's, you find out eventually, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I am a writer. That's the whole point of that particular novel. But it wouldn't let me alone.
Like the film being there in a way.
Very much so.
Yeah,
Very much so.
Well, it's been varied. I mean, my first book is about my family and the criminals in my family, and about the corruption in Jersey City, which I did not want to write about at all. I had moved to Alaska to get away from. And so when I came back to New York and went to graduate school and was writing about Alaska, I kept getting assignments that would have to do with the family, and so I'd write a story about my family, and the professors were like, what? You need to write that. You need to write about Jersey City. I was like, no. I ran away from Jersey City. I'm not doing that. And like, again and again and again, just 2 years of, you need to write this, and I'm writing that. And so finally, I finished graduate school, and I was sending out my book about Alaska, and I couldn't sell it, and I had an agent who was interested in me, and she said, I really like your writing, but I don't think I can sell this book about Alaska. Do you have any other ideas? And of course, you got to think on your feet as a writer. I'm like, well, I have all these criminals in my family. Yes. And so write me a 50-page proposal. And that was my first book. And it sold in a weekend, Labor Day 1999. It changed my life. And so, but I didn't want to write about it. It wasn't like, it was telling me I needed to write about it, but that wasn't my choice, basically.
And your books are so deeply researched. What was your experience as you were writing, investigating the criminals and the criminality in your hometown? What was that like?
It was crazy.
Did you see into it?
Yeah. I mean, I had worked as a reporter, as a columnist in the town, so I knew a lot of the stories already. I had covered the mayor's trial, so I knew firsthand. And I knew all my relatives who were in jail. So, my grandfather tried to kill us when I was 5. I mean, I knew those things. They were there. So I basically just had to go back and verify everything. You know what I mean? So I would go to the library and look up the story about my great-great-grandmother being murdered by my great-great-grandfather in 1922. And there it was in the paper. So it was a matter of just, my mother would give me a date, and I would go to the library and find it. My mom was terrific. She was really the source. And I would interview her, I interviewed everybody in my family. And then the history of the city, I sort of, did at the library, great library in Jersey City. And there was a lot of research. I was going back and forth through the Holland Tunnel because I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And I would have to go back and forth to Jersey City. And when I sold the book, I was like 7 months pregnant. And my mother would get so upset. She's like, "You're going to have that baby in the Holland Tunnel." Oh my God, I'm going to say Anyway, but yeah, so that was the first book. So, but they vary. Every book is really different. It's like having a different kid, just
Yeah.
like a child. The latest book is about someone else's. I wrote 3 memoirs and then ran out of material, basically. So I had to bother someone else's family, And
Yeah.
so the latest book is about somebody else's family.
Can you just tell this group, how did that story find you and?
Yeah, it's a
you and
pretty
your
crazy
friends?
story. So I write for the New York Times pretty regularly, and I did a story about 6 years ago about a guy who escaped Nazi Germany in 1938 and was there in New York the night that Marilyn Monroe's dress blew up on the subway grate.
Oh.
And he filmed her. He was just an amateur filmmaker. But his film from that night is the last remaining footage from that night, because Billy Wilder shot the footage in New York, but there was so much noise from guys yelling and screaming higher, higher, and gross stuff, and they couldn't use the footage. So they had to reshoot it on a lot in Hollywood, like a month or so later. So that footage was lost, the Billy Wilder footage. And so this footage that this guy who escaped Nazi Germany had is the actual footage from that night. And he's like 5 feet away from Marilyn Monroe. It's pretty incredible. It's beautiful footage. If you go to the New York Times website and put my name in, you'll see it. And you can just push play and you'll see some of the footage. It's only a few seconds, but it's fabulous. So anyway, the granddaughter of the guy who escaped Nazi Germany had been looking for someone to write a story about him and about the footage, because she had found the footage after he died. And she knew somebody who I knew, and she said, "Oh, this is just the person to write it." And we got together and we totally hit it off. She showed me the footage at lunch. But then when she started telling me about her grandfather and his escape from Nazi Germany, I was like, well, that's the story. Marilyn's great, but she's almost like the MacGuffin, sort of like just to get people in. And his escape from Nazi Germany is insane. It's an insane story. And so I wrote a story for the Times. It went viral. It was one of those stories that went around the world and back again. And about 2 years later, Bonnie, the granddaughter, came to me and said, "Do you want to write a book about my grandfather?" And I was like, yes. Like, it wasn't even, yeah.
And it was COVID times, right?
This was right before COVID.
Right before
It was the winter before COVID. It was in December, November, December.
Wow.
And so we started to put together a proposal, and then COVID hit, and then it was a big game changer. So we couldn't do any actual hands-on research. Everything had to be over the phone or Zoom. We interviewed all her relatives on Zoom. I had to, there was this huge, this is a whole other part of the story, with the guy who escaped from Nazi Germany had a financial sponsor to come over, and the financial sponsor was the publisher of Superman. So the book's title is The American Way, a true story of Nazi escape, Superman, and Marilyn Monroe. So there's 3 things, right? And they're all connected. You don't think they are, but they're all connected. And so for the Superman, there's a Superman archive at Columbia University. It's huge. It's a huge firm. And so we couldn't go there. The librarian from that archive had to hold up each piece of paper out of like 20,000 boxes and ask us if we wanted that piece of paper. It was like, so it was insane. It was just, the research was really not easy, but it was fun, and we had a great time doing it. And Bonnie did a lot of research. We did the book together. And then finally, towards the end, we went to Berlin, when the COVID times were sort of ending, very end of the project. We went to Berlin, and that was terrific because we filled in a lot of blanks of where he lived, where he worked, and miraculously all the places that he had lived and worked were still standing. You'd have like new building, and then his house, was still there. It was kind of a miracle. And so, anyway, so that's where that story came from. It was kind of out of the blue. But as soon as you hear it, you smell it, you're like, that's it. It's good,
You get to know your muses very well.
Yeah, you have your antenna.
Yeah.
If I could just add to something you said, when you first told me it's about the guy that he happened to film Marilyn Monroe, I thought, how on earth did you make a book out of that? Like, that's one, and sometimes, and now I understand with the Holocaust and the Superman. And a lot of times an idea might strike you as great, but at best it's going to be a short story or an article.
It's not, a lot.
300 pages, so you've got to have more. And also about that story is there's a nice arc, and sometimes you'll get a story, just it's lacking in the arc, which is what I believe was it,
Yeah.
you talked about, Joe, is character, obstacle, resolution. Perfect arc. And unless you have that, and the resolution doesn't have to be a happy Hollywood ending, but it has to be, you see how the character has changed, grown, suffered, I don't know, but, so you have to have that arc, and if you don't have that arc, it makes it so much harder to write about something.
Yeah, I think having
Yeah.
Superman angle, that was
Yeah.
the third thing that sort of kicked into a book, because she had found that out. Because she heard rumors about it, but in those 2 years, she nailed it down and knew who the guy was and all that. And so then we interviewed his family and we got all that information. So that was like, so then all of us became the
Yeah.
narrative, you know, because he'd get it out there.
Right.
And it's crazy because Superman was coming out the week that the grandfather came to find the sponsor. So it was all, these connections were kind of crazy in the book, you know, you can find those from research, you know, you dig into everything. Yeah, it was a wacky story. So.
It's an amazing book, and just thinking about how very different your works are, the common thread I think is when you open the cover, you're there. It becomes a very organic experience, you know. And I remember when I read Schreiber, if you've studied English in college, you have enough a sense of confidence, and I got into it. Oh my God, that's exactly what that looks like, you know. But you make it real for your readers because of the work you do and the life you've lived to make it real for your reader. It doesn't just drop out of the sky. It's amazing. So I just want to shift now to Chris. Chris published his novel Schreiber in 2013, right?
Yeah, it was originally published in 2013, very small press, and then it was reissued 2 years later by Touchstone Books, Simon & Schuster.
Yeah, but 10 years later, it was on the screen as A Little White Lie, a major motion picture starring Michael Shannon, Keith Hudson, Don Johnson, and directed by Michael Marin. Meanwhile, Chris has worked as a singer, songwriter, drummer, acted in plays, taught writing to underserved communities in the Bronx, university students and workshops in Ridgefield and Westport, and in Garner Correctional Institute. And when I think about going from Westport and Ridgefield to prisons and soup kitchens, it's quite a range of people that you've taught writing to. But nobody here is a one-trick pony, and I'm just wondering, how do you manage all that you do in addition to writing, and how does all that you do play into your writing?
You make me sound very busy, you know. I consider myself profoundly lazy. Honestly, it's like I'll do anything except write. As much as, like, when I get in the zone, and then writing can be the greatest thing in the world, but it's like, God, I've written so much, I'll do anything. I'll go to prison, I'll do that, you know. I don't know, you find, I have no idea, you find the time, you know, but something's important, you do it. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, you talked about the prison, and then I used to do the workshop in prison in the morning, and then I would go to Ridgefield, and at the time I was doing like an adult ed writing workshop. So I'd go directly from prison to, as you can imagine, mostly sort of like retired women of Ridgefield, Connecticut. Let's just say it was whiplash-inducing culturally. And but I loved that. It was so much fun to go from like one extreme to the other, and I learned so much from both groups of people. And then it just inspires me to write.
You're talking about juggling all the things you
Yeah,
have to do,
how do you? Yeah.
or surviving as a writer.
Okay.
I think I was both acting, some of the voiceover announcing work that I've done, and the writing can all come together in a way with me, because I think a lot of actors can become good writers, and Sam Shepard being one, let's say. And who wrote Glengarry? David Mamet, also a good actor. And, you know, because you learn from both of those things. In my writing, I was lucky enough to have also developed this this career in voice work, in announcing, and voiceovers and commercial work, and even cartoons. So that was the subsidy that let me write and not care about making some money. Now I do, I get some royalties here and there, but not enough to make a living even at this stage. But so one has to be realistic about it. If people are starting to write, previously in an interview somewhere said, what advice would you give to people just starting out? And I'd say, don't quit your day job, because you really, you have to give yourself a lot of time to get established. I mean, if you're good, you will get established. But, so that's my take on it.
Your day job.
Well, I basically freelance. I'm a freelance journalist, so I'm always doing stories. So whenever I see something, I pitch it. You know, half of them wind up not getting written, but I'm always pitching, and I teach. You know, and the teaching is good because you're getting out of your head and you're getting out of your room. You know, I mean, I'm in my pajamas like 90% of the time. You know, I take a shower and then I put on new pajamas. You know, so I love pajamas. Why would I wear regular clothes? I'm at home with my dog. So, but yeah, being out in the world is important for a writer. I mean, obviously you have to be out there, know what's going on. You know, you can't. I mean, I guess some people. I think Emily Dickinson didn't leave the house. You know, I mean, there are people who didn't leave and were great, but I think generally you need to be out and about. You know, so I think those other jobs help you to do that. You know, whether, you know, when I was younger, I had crazy jobs like you. I was a bartender at a roadhouse in Alaska. You know, I mushed dogs. You know, I was a babysitter. You know, I did 1,000 crazy jobs. And that's, you've got to be out there. I tell my students that. You've got to get out in the world. You know, whether you're going to be a journalist or a more creative writer, you know, you got to get out there. And so now, that's through the freelancing. You know, I'm always doing crazy stories. You never know where I'm going to turn up. Or the teaching, you know, just being, and it's nice to be younger people too. I'm getting old, you know. It's nice to be
Really?
Yeah, you gotta know what's going on overnight. It's a whole different head, you know. So it's good to get that feedback from kids, I think.
Yeah.
So just follow up with one thing, you know, what you're saying about being a waiter. I
Yeah.
was a waiter too, and a bartender, and sold real estate, and did all sorts of things early on. But in one of my plays, I was able to have a character in New York meeting someone else, and someone says, "Oh, so what does your good-looking cousin here do?" And he says, "Well, I've come to New York to write the great American musical." And the other person says, "Oh, so you're a waiter." You have to take some of these jobs early on,
Yeah.
and it's worth it forever.
Yeah, so the book, the nonfiction I wrote about the serial killer came out when I was still practicing law, and I wrote it mainly on the weekends, or sometimes I would take one day off a week to write the book. But it got to the point where I think it led to my frozen shoulder. Because I was practicing law, writing legal memos all the time, carrying all my big bags to court. And then on the weekends, this hunched over writing, and it was just too much. So when that book came out, and it was just, I was too busy with 2 jobs. I had a day job as a lawyer, and it was busy, and then I had this other thing going on. So I decided to retire early. So a few years ago, I retired, and now, of course, everything's settled down much easier. It's not overwhelming like it used to be. So every afternoon, I go to the library to write, most afternoons. And I find that helps the most. I'll find a quiet section because you can't be distracted on your phone or, you know, going on CNN off and on, or, you know, you're just there to write. And it's amazing how much you can get done in 3 hours. 3 hours, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I also liken it to, you know, when you're in school and you get a syllabus on your first day of class about everything you're gonna have to read and all the tests and the papers, and you're overwhelmed. And then you, in law school, you know, we go then to our next 4 courses and have the same expectations, and you're thinking, how can I humanly do this? You just, one day at a time, you just chisel it off one day at a time. And for writing, you know, you just try to write, you know, set your goal, 20 pages a week or 3 hours a day, whatever works for you, as long as you stick to your goal and do it. You gotta do it. How many people do you know, I wanna write a book, I wanna write a book? You got to write it, you know?
Absolutely. It's interesting, something what you say about being in the world, and being in a classroom too. You learn sometimes more than you really want to know.
Right.
But then it's interesting to have this conversation about that in this town where so many artists over the decades have come to get away from it all. You know, including Laura Anderson, Stephen Sondheim, and myriad visual artists as well, you know. And they came here when the lights went out, that was it, no internet, maybe no plumbing. So there's that combination of being in the world and taking your time to get out of it. So I thank you so much for your thoughts. I want to turn it over to the audience for their questions before we.
I've got a question.
My husband's
Yeah.
here.
So, so artificial intelligence, tool or threat?
Good,
And
good
you
question.
come from so many different backgrounds, so you probably see it like Joe from so many different sides, right?
Well, I wrote a play called Alexa, a short play, 3 years ago. I don't know if you saw it, Ellen. I don't think so. It wasn't done here, but
No, but
it's been done around in
know
short,
about it.
short play festivals and all, and this before AI is so prominent now. But a lot of short play festivals will say, oh, we want a 10 or 15-minute play, and 500 will be submitted, and they'll pick 4 or something. So, but Alexa has had a life in some of these festivals. The idea was a writer who was trying to write a 10 to 15-minute play, and a little stumped right in the beginning. And the writer simply says, Alexa, what's a plot? And Alexa comes out and says, well, a plot is a boundary of land, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I knew you'd say that. Right? No, Alexa, and starts going, and Alexa, he starts asking Alexa for help. And then Alexa, a little bit Twilight Zone-ish or whatever, starts saying, you know, by the way, Dick, you're not a very good writer. And it's got on from there. And your wife is having an affair. And she goes on more and more until finally it becomes this meltdown at the end. So artificial intelligence is a threat in my figure, in that play at least. So beyond that, oh boy, it's a threat to writers, obviously. I mean, this is what the strike in that is all about, and the writers, of course, settled, but that was a tough one. Yeah, you know, if they can have replace writers with that. Now I think the Writers Guild has made that fairly safe, we hope. But
I can't really see at this stage in AI how it could replace writers, but I do know, because this is what my husband does for a living, that it is a threat. But when I wrote a film treatment for Escape from Mariupol that I pitched to some different producers. We've had some interest. And I have a film agent, so I'm hoping that that may be made into a movie, and it's a pie in the sky pipe dream, I know. But I went on ChatGPT and just said, you know, write me a screenplay about a woman from Mariupol who survives Russia's invasion underground, and da-da-da-da. And ChatGPT wrote it for me, and it was awful. I mean, it was just full of cliche after cliche after cliche. And so I think, you know, for over 40 years I've watched General Hospital, right? I know it's terrible, it's my guilty pleasure. And when the writer's strike came, they had a lot of AI writing the scripts. And not coincidentally, I just stopped writing. For the first time in 40 years, I lost interest in the show. So I don't know, I find that in terms of creative projects, AI draws on past work. But that's the whole point of art, is to, yes, you learn from the past, but it's new, fresh. And I don't see AI doing that now, but you're the expert. I don't see in the arts that it's doing anything but plagiarizing what's already been done.
But a lot of writers are saying that, in fact,
it is plagiarism
Yes.
in small,
Absolutely.
it's sort of like
Exactly.
sampling in the music industry.
Yes.
That because AI uses every writer's work and
Exactly.
synthesizes it, that
Exactly.
you're being constantly, they're violating copyright at every turn
Right.
when you use AI.
Your intellectual property.
In that sense, it's doing what's been done forever, which is, stealing. Um, The problem is that it's cheaper. So, it used to be people got paid to steal and be unoriginal.
Mhm.
Now it's just a computer being unoriginal. I mean, go to see half the, you talk about it's spat out a cliche film script that's pretty much half,
Half
if
the movies.
at least half the movies that you
Exactly,
see in the cinemas,
Yeah.
and people are getting paid for that. Just think of all those people in the back room saying, we don't have to pay anybody
Yeah.
to spit out these movies.
Well, they're saying that they can become templates, that this is not the finished product. So now you have a template to follow,
But
and
any
then you
screenplay-
add the writer to give it
Every screenplay
that
has a template.
free song. Yeah.
Well, I work for a tech company that is all about the data. And so one of the founders of the company, whenever he wants to add something to the corporate handbook, goes to AI first and says, write me something about this, In contrast to that, Helene's husband wrote a column about AI, and then one of the points he made in his column was that it's gonna be there, but it's also not gonna be the real thing. There's not gonna have the writer's heart.
Feel the wind, that's what I have to say, the sun on your face.
Yeah.
You're human, you're just not, it's not gonna be able to recreate it, but it's gonna try and get it from somewhere else, because you're gonna steal it from somewhere else.
Right.
Well, I read,
He's an optimist. so.
the legal profession is in a lot of trouble right now because of AI. And when I think about so much of legal work, it really is based on a very specific formula, and then you have a few caveats or exceptions, and you apply the facts to the formula and to the exceptions. So I can see how AI would be more of a threat, in fact, to something like that, which is very rules-based. But then any lawyer will tell you, well, the masterful lawyers are the most creative types, right? It's not about thinking inside the box, you have to think outside. And I think the same is true for writing, that AI can give you all those basics, but when it comes to creating something new and fresh and innovative, it falls woefully short.
You can't rely on completion, you need to, as a human, you need to.
It doesn't have the energy of the
Yeah,
human
yeah.
mind, and how do you put that into words or measurements? What is that energy, that muse, that human spirit that makes a story great?
And I think artificial intelligence has affirmed for us, we have souls. I
Yes.
had one kid hand in an assignment that was computer generated, and it was eerie because it was soulless. It was not a major assignment, it's like, you're kidding me.
Exactly.
And I, yeah, and I think some of the stuff's been around for a while, like the sonnet generator, one of these Shakespeare websites, you put in an idea and you get, and it's delightful because it's such garbage,
Yes.
you can do better.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know?